dates in, please?
Sure. The petition of Ralph Plum and Aquidneck Grange, patrons of husbandry, by their attorney David Martland for a special use permit from section 902 to permit a restaurant with a liquor license. Said real estate is located at 499 East Main Road and further identified as lot 27 on tax assessor plat 113.
Well, good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. David Martland on behalf of Mr. Plum. This is a petition for a special use permit associated with the Grange property. Mr. Plum and his brother, Ralph Plum and Matt Plum, are looking to redevelop the Grange property. The existing building, what they're proposing to do on really, I guess it would be the second floor. It's kind of a weird split level type. The bottom floor will be some office space and some space dedicated to the restaurant, which will be on the second floor of the building. And so they're going to rehabilitate that existing building and really get that fixed up. They're not going to be knocking it down. They're going to maintain the historical Grange building. Put in a restaurant that I'll have Ralph explain. But in order to have a restaurant with a liquor license in a limited business district, you need a special use permit. So we're here with respect to that. Additionally, there's some additional site work that's going to be taking place. There's another building that's proposed that will be an office building, an office use type of building, which is sort of like phase 2. Because of the liquor license and special use permit, this board is the permitting authority with respect to the development plan review as well. So the process that we've sort of gone through with respect to this is Mike Russell, who is the engineer, and Paul Bannon, who is the traffic consultant on the project, submitted plans to the Department of Transportation. Those were approved, so there's a physical alteration permit that's been issued to allow for the proposed use of the restaurant on the two state highways. You've got East Main Road and Aquidneck Avenue. There will be access to Aquidneck Avenue over the right-of-way that's there, so that will be reopened. The entry point on East Main Road is restricted. That'll be a right-in, right-out only, so you won't have any conflicts of cars that are heading south on East Main Road trying to take a left in, and additionally you won't have cars that will be taking a left out onto East Main Road. So that's restricted to a right-in, right-out at that point. The Aquidneck Avenue access is a full access where you can go either left or right on Aquidneck. So the process is you got to go get that state permit first. That was done. We then submitted the development plan review application, which gets referred to the technical review committee. So we went to the technical review committee. The committee reviewed the proposals relative to really the technical issues, looking at traffic and drainage, utility connections and things of that nature. They didn't see any issues with respect to what was proposed from those standpoints. They recommended a positive approval. With that, we went to the planning board. We met with the planning board last week, last Wednesday, and presented the proposal to the planning board. The planning board unanimously endorsed the proposal and granted some waivers with respect to some of the design issues. The waivers that were granted related to the new building that's being constructed. There are sort of some of those hardy board materials which are synthetic materials. And even though they're simulated to look like wood, you still need a waiver for that. So there was a waiver granted for the hardy board siding and the sort of the PVC AZAC trim that's being utilized. Additionally, there was no added screening elements along the westerly property line, which abuts the Royal Plaza Ramada Inn property to the west. There are some existing trees that are there, the cherry fruit trees along there, but there wasn't any additional screening being proposed because there is a utility easement, and so that we didn't want to do any additional planting in that strip. And finally, there was a waiver granted for not having additional parking lot trees. Under the commercial design standard, you're supposed to have 1 tree for every 5 spaces at a minimum caliper of 4 inches. They could not be accommodated in the areas near the parking lots because of the low-impact development drainage design that Mr. Russell's put together, and he can explain that. But there are trees on site. So there are 3 trees on that westerly property line that are substantial trees. There are also a couple of trees on the easterly property line that will be maintained, and another one on the southerly property line that will be maintained. So there are trees. In addition, along the southerly property line where it abuts a residential use, there'll be some heavy screening that'll be incorporated. That's on the landscape plan that was submitted with along with the architectural plans. So there is a double row of arborvitae, and there is we'll strike that. There's not a double row of arborvitae. There's a double row of evergreen type of screening. They used a mix of types of evergreen to try to get away from simply using straight arborvitaes. There are some types of junipers and Japanese cedars, as well as some arborvitae that are used in that screening, but just to have a variety of type of evergreen. So that plan was presented to the planning board and was adopted last week on a unanimous recommendation. There were 2 recommended conditions of approval. One, that prior to the building permit being issued, the town engineer would complete a final review and approval of the stormwater management plan. And 2, that there would be the institution of some traffic calming measures which would be intended to deter cut-through traffic. So to keep people from going from East Main Road, cutting through the site and over to Aquidneck Avenue, and obviously, the Plums, they don't want to see that cut-through traffic, screaming through the parking lot. So, there was discussion about, using some sort of measures, which may be speed bumps as well as signage, and they're going to work through that on an ongoing basis to see if there is an issue and whether or not they ought to add additional measures over time. So those were the 2 conditions of approval that the planning board recommended. So this evening I have with me Ralph Plum to present some testimony. I also have his brother Matt Plum who here. I've got Mike Russell, the engineer who did the site work, and Mr. Houle to present testimony from a real estate perspective. I've got Mr. Bannon to answer any questions that might come up with respect to any traffic issues. With that, I'd like to call Mr.
I got a
Plum.
traffic question.
Sure.
You made the comment earlier on the East Main Road side,
Yes.
right in, right out only?
Yes.
How are you going to accomplish that?
Well, it was approved as a right-in, right-out with, and there's supposed to be signage installed with respect to that, to instruct anyone in there that they're not supposed to be taking, you know, a left out.
Enforcement transfers to Middletown
Yeah.
Police once you post it, correct?
Correct.
I said enforcement transfers to Middletown Police once it's posted, correct?
I'm not certain. I would defer to the solicitor as to whether or not that,
It depends on the signage, and typically that, you know, it's not something that's prohibited by ordinance, so.
Right. There's going to be
Probably
absolutely
not.
nothing stopping somebody coming down East Main Road, taking a left into that property. A sign's not going to do it.
I would suggest maybe that
Let's
they
wait
have
for
a
the
traffic
testimony.
expert who can address those issues.
if I could just ask Mr. Bannon to come up to answer that question. You know, that was what DOT requested be done.
Mr. Bannon, raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony tonight will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
State your name and address for the record.
For the record, my name is Paul Bannon, B-A-N-N-O-N, 53rd Street, Barrington, Rhode Island. 53rd Street, Barrington, Rhode Island.
Mr. Bannon, you've testified before us before, so we're going to accept you as an expert
Yes.
expert witness.
Relative to the driveway restrictions, the DOT didn't, it's essentially located in its current location on the property. No major improvements were proposed, and the DOT did not request physical constraint of that driveway and felt that signage would be appropriate. Both signing and pavement markings would be employed. If it becomes an issue in the future, then the owner can look at some physical island-type modifications. But at this point, with the DOT did not require them to physically restrict those movements.
Could it be designed and developed to make it a right in,
More
right
restrictive,
out only?
correct, yeah,
With
you
like
just Pork Chop
a
Island.
little island?
Yeah, we're again, as Mr. Martland had indicated, that the planning board was concerned with cut-through traffic, so we're going to monitor the situation. We may use the raised crosswalk, a speed hump within, so we're going to be looking at how cars are actually using the site now in the future that it would become available to them. So we want to restrict movements and restrict traffic flow through the property. So we will be monitoring that as it moves forward. As the Grange redevelopment or renovation is like phase one component of the development, and the office would be the second. So it's, you know, not a one and done type thing.
Yeah.
Well, my concern is the traffic in that area, like this time of the year. You're coming down East Main Road, that sun is so intense, right at you. Somebody taking a left.
And that's
Into the
why we
property.
recommended that it be, you would not be allowed to do it, and you'd be turning potentially across the standing queue of traffic that we do not want. We want them to take a left safely at the traffic signal, and then a right turn into the property.
Okay.
I guess the thought then is if that's what you want, why not do it?
That can be a condition with the town, but to this point, it felt that signage was sufficient.
Then the second question,
Well, could I make a suggestion that,
I think that's what you should.
Yeah, I don't think signs, quite frankly, are gonna do it.
well, could I suggest, you know, I can't recall what project this was, it might have not been in this community, but,
We just talked about the development across the street,
yep,
and Mr. Bannon was the traffic expert, if I'm recalling correctly, for that project.
yes.
And we discussed, and we ended up requiring that I guess it's the northern exit out of that property did put up a island barrier because of that same exact concern in an approximate, same approximate area.
There is yes, there is an actual physical island in that,
Yeah.
that other project, that is correct.
Then you wouldn't need a sign.
Well, you
And signage.
you probably need signage.
But then you wouldn't need your sign
You'd still
because
need
they
the
couldn't.
We'd still-
It's like what they did at Sakuchi's when they redid Sakuchi's.
Right.
Right in, right out. Unless you go up to the entrance to Stop and Shop and come in and go all the way around. I just think that's going to be a huge hazard, especially in that intersection with the other side being developed. And the other side does have a curb cut, and it prevents you from taking that left. My thought.
Well, I was, could I suggest that we could revisit that issue in 6 months and see if there's an issue related to that? And if, you know, the town thought then, you know, that there was a continuing issue with that, we could then, at that point, reapply to DOT to request an island?
You know,
Well, Mr. Martin, I'm only saying that because, as you know, I'm there every single day,
Right.
4, 5, 10 times a day.
Yeah,
I know how busy that intersection gets.
Yeah.
I know how busy that can get. And I know how people like to cut through from Forest Avenue to get to, from West Main to get to Forest Avenue, or from East Main Road to get to Valley Road. I know how it is. And the signs, forget it. I'm not dead set against signs. Signs do help some people, but a left.
I would say that you're, you know, I hear you. I think the majority of people would follow the signs. But there are, you know, a significant portion of folks that, you know, ignore plenty of things out there and do dumb stuff they shouldn't do. You know, I completely understand that.
Yeah, let's go through your presentation. I think, my personal thought, Mr. Martland, is I think you're gonna have more of an issue of people using it to siphon off the traffic going out of town on East Main Road and trying to get to Aquidneck. I think you're gonna have an internal issue, not the turning left or right. I think it's gonna be that, it's gonna be the flow, and that's why I think you have to wait and see, because you won't know until you build it, whether people are gonna be using that as a cut-through.
Yeah, and it would only be for that direction because
Right.
it's restricted.
Right.
But we're looking at, we would do a, raised crosswalk right there connecting the two
Right.
buildings, so it'd be, that's like a speed
Let's
bump.
get on with your presentation, then we'll address
can I just say
questions.
with respect to the presentation, we're voting on a special
Right.
use permit for a liquor license.
Liquor
right?
license, correct.
So the level of detail
Yeah.
should be focused on
Correct.
that special use permit, not everything that the planning board has already approved, right?
Agreed.
Okay.
Agreed.
Do you agree with that?
Are you
Yeah,
okay
I
with
mean,
that? I don't want to
the,
cut you short, but
I mean, the use that requires a special use permit is the use of the restaurant with the liquor license.
Right.
So,
Did the planning, if you've been through the planning board, I just don't want to keep going back to the same thing, but this has already been to the planning.
yes.
Yes, there's a letter in the
This has
file.
already been to the Department of Transportation.
Yes.
Everybody's okayed that.
Yeah, the Department of Transportation has approved the uses, has approved the curb cuts, has approved the access, and approved the signage.
With the one stipulation that has to do with traffic being that they would review over time, like you just suggested, revisit possibly in 6 months to make sure people aren't misusing that entrance and exit.
was that a
That was
stipulation?
my suggestion.
Okay.
The provision was that that we'll employ some type of internal traffic control measures to deter cut-through traffic.
Cut through traffic.
Yeah, because we don't want that. I mean, that just, we don't want people cutting through there. We don't want it to become that. I mean, that, and so it may be putting up, you know, those sort of speed bumps through there or some other, you know, restrictions, you know.
Well, there's plenty of things that you can do internal with respect for cut through traffic.
Correct.
Just go down Chase's Lane.
And that's what, I'm reading the planning board recommendation, and that's what their specific recommendation was to focus on the cut-through traffic. So I think what the petitioner has expressed, you know, if it becomes an issue, that can be dealt with after the fact. Correct?
Yeah, we're gonna be working on that on an ongoing basis to try to, you know.
And Mr. Chair, just one thing I would just recommend, if you decide that you want to review this at some point down the road, once they have some experience with it, I would put something as a condition so that you have the ability to have it come back.
Right.
As opposed to trying to deal with it if a problem arises.
Yeah. A number of years ago, I had a petition in Newport relative to the Dunkin' Donuts down on Connell Highway, and it was with the drive-through. And there was, you know, a concern relative to, you know, issues related to that. And so there was a condition there where, you know, we went back in 1 year to you know, see if, you know, the city thought there were any, you know, ongoing issues or problems related to that. So, you know, that type of situation is not unprecedented. With that, if I could call Mr. Plum.
Yep. Raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony tonight will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your name and address for the record.
Ralph Plum, 28 Esplanade, Middletown.
Okay.
Mr. Plum, could you sort of explain your background to the board and your brother's background?
Sure. We both grew up in Portsmouth. We lived on the island pretty much our whole lives. My brother has been working and managing down at Brick Alley for the last 10, 15 years. My area of expertise is more in the real estate arena. We're going to partner on this venture where I'm kind of managing and taking care of a lot of the real estate stuff. My brother primarily on the restaurant side of things. And just looking to expand on the good reputation my parents, I think, have built in town to run and operate a restaurant and hopefully continue with that.
And what type of restaurant do you intend to operate here?
So the best way to describe it would be upstairs at the restaurant at Brick Alley down at 140 Thames Street in Newport. My brother came up with an idea, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago for burgers, salads, lobster rolls, kind of more quick serve type items, not entree type stuff. Very well received from members of the community, and as we thought more about it, transitioning that into this space as well. So a lot of stuff that people are familiar with at Brick Alley Pub, but non-entree type items.
And what do you intend to do with the development, with the existing Grange? What type of improvements do you intend to make with that building?
So the existing building will, for the most part, architecturally remain the same. Most people won't notice a difference, except for condition, trim, you know, repair of siding, so on and so forth. The only real exterior changes we're making is we're adding a lift, a handicap lift on the southerly side of the building, and then for the most part, you know, replacing of existing windows, replacing of roof, stuff like that. So the existing building is not going to change very much at all.
And have you been in contact with any historic preservation folks with respect to what it is you intend to do here?
Yeah, we have. We actually were contacted by the state preservation folks that work with the Department of the Interior for Registry of Historic Buildings and stuff like that. Gave a favorable recommendation meeting we had with them of our project. Recently, we're contacted by the head of the Middletown Historical Committee. Actually talked to her at length today, and they were very positive about the project as well. And I know my brother spoke with the head of membership at the Grange as well, and they were very favorable to us about our plans for the project.
Is it fair to say that because you're preserving this building, you'll probably prefer bidders for the property?
I was told that was one of the big reasons why we were chosen instead of some other, I don't know if there's other people that were involved in the bidding process.
And some of those other people, you understand, we're not going to retain the building, right?
That's correct. I was told we were the only one that was likely to retain the building.
And how about the new construction? Are you planning on matching? I know you're using different materials, that makes sense, but are you planning on matching the look of the
We had our
existing building?
architect draw some elevations.
Why don't I grab this here and just, so a little closer to the board. And is it would it be the bottom four
That's correct, yeah, the bottom 4 elevations.
would be the new building?
Nice.
And so it was done to sort of match the existing architecture of the Grange, is that correct?
Yeah, and we worked with Courts and Design, Spencer McComb on the project. Courts and Design, principal architect Spencer McComb, as well as Jed, apologize. Sopcich. With Jed and Spencer on the plan, and you know, a lot of this design was to take into account, you know, the Grange look, feel, roof lines, but without overwhelming or overpowering the Grange building. I mean, for us, the Grange building is important to us personally, just from some different things regarding our family and farming, and the more we've gotten into it, the people that we've talked to, a lot of people are pretty excited we're keeping the building, and we're gonna also put some different artifacts, whatever we can do to kind of tell that story as people come in the building as well, ideally.
And the first floor is going to be office space, and is that going to be rental, or is that going to be internal office space?
Mostly rental. We'll probably retain some of it ourselves. It's kind of a split level. I don't know if you've been in there, but it's like 5 stairs down, 5 stairs up, yeah. But that lower level will be, right now the plan is 8 offices, a shared conference room. We'll probably occupy 1 or 2 of those 8 spaces.
Okay.
That's the plan.
I don't have any further questions.
Any other questions for Mr.
Ralph.
Plum from the board?
If I could call Mike Russell, please.
Raise your right hand, state your name. Do you swear the testimony tonight will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your name and address for the record.
Mike Russell, R-U-S-S-E-L-L, 680 Aquidneck Avenue.
Mr. Russell, you've testified before the board before, so we're going to accept you as an expert witness.
Thank you.
Mike, I think probably the best way to go about this is, just allow you to explain the existing conditions on site and the proposed conditions and the impact on the surrounding area with respect to what's proposed.
Certainly. So I think the access, circulation of the site's been discussed, so I won't get into that anymore unless the board has any specific questions. But within the site, we've added maintaining this driveway that comes through from East Main and reestablishing this curb cut on Aquidneck Avenue is essentially the same driveway that runs through this proposed layout. We've added 39 parking spaces to the site, where 38 are required for the respective uses. Utilities for both buildings are going to be the Grange Hall has existing services, they're going to remain. The office building, proposed office building, those services will be connected from within the property. The only thing that we are going to do, there's a utility pole out here in the right-of-way on East Main Road. One of the planning board's requirements is underground service, so we're going to run an underground service off of that pole into stormwater management for the project is as Mr. Martland indicated, it's a low-impact development approach, low profile. There's relatively high groundwater here, about 3 feet. Typical Aquidneck Island soils, very dense, silty, sandy loam. So we are looking at an LID approach, bioswales, filter strips, rain gardens, bioretention, that type of thing, which there's landscaping components integrated into those. They're in close proximity to the parking area. Hence, one of the waivers that we requested from the planning board was to not plant parking lot trees there, as they would obstruct and interfere with the function of those practices. Drainage patterns are maintained for the property. Essentially, everything flows off of this northwest corner down to a culvert head wall there on Aquidneck Avenue. Part of our physical alteration permit process, DOT requested that that culvert be replaced in kind, which we did. Landscaping talked about briefly. It's essentially infill with street trees and some plantings along East Main Road as to not obstruct site distances. We're going to maintain this existing hedge, evergreen hedge here, which is on the property. There's also a mature tree here. It's kind of straddles the property line. If necessary, we'll have Mr. Plum engage in an adopt-a-spot program with DOT, because this is the property here, to maintain that if necessary. It is a nice mature hedge, and it's going to remain. Mr. Marlin talked a little bit about the waiver that we requested for landscape screening along the westerly property line. There are 3 what kind of trees they are. They're not apple trees, fruit trees, very mature, nice trees are going to remain. But there is a gas service line that runs along the property that connects into the backside, the west side of the Grange Hall. So for that reason, we asked for a waiver for landscape screening with the planning board. Site lighting, essentially is going to be pole lighting in the central area of the site to eliminate the parking spaces, all downward reflecting, dark sky compliant. There is some hardscape proposed sidewalk access into the building. There'll be bollard lighting in association with the hardscape and the landscape around the buildings. That's just a very brief overview of the site, proposed site plan.
The southern boundary, you talked about applying screening between the commercial property and the private residences there?
That's correct. There's one valued tree there which is going to remain. There's a dead tree,
Yeah,
very
it's a
large dead tree, which everybody's probably sure seen, that's coming down. But it's going to be a full 20-foot, 20-foot wide landscape buffer all along that southerly boundary.
Good.
And the landscape plan is included in there were 2 sets of plans. One were the plans that Mike had prepared, Mr. Russell had prepared, the engineering site plans, and then there were plans submitted by Courts and Design, and the landscape plan is included in that set. It was prepared by Verdi, who is Pamela Rogers. And if you look at that plan, it shows a substantial buffering to that, to the residents. So for purposes of the special use permit, so that we're not creating any nuisance, and that way the parking is.
And you're actually improving over the buffer that currently exists.
That's correct, yes. I don't have any further questions for Mr. Russell.
Any questions for Mr. Russell from the board? Thank you.
Thank you.
And, if I could call Mr. Hool.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony tonight on this matter will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your name and address for the record.
James Houle, Houle, 198 Union Street, Portsmouth, Rhode Island.
Tell us about,
If I could ask that Mr. Hool be accepted as an expert in the field of real estate.
we accept.
Thank you. Mr. Hool, I engaged you to perform a review of the petition and prepare a report and findings relative to the application for the special use permit. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And this report dated January 9, 2019 is the report you have prepared.
That is, yes.
I'd like to submit this, Chairman.
We're going to mark this Exhibit A.
And Mr. Hool, if you just want to explain the process you undertook to review this project and the findings that you came up with in connection with the special use permit application.
Sure. Once you contacted me, I was able to review both the Cortland design and the other design for the engineering of the site, as well as the planning board results on what they had asked and what they had been satisfied with. So I took that information and I looked at the petition. The petition is essentially requires, it's an OBA zone. So because it's an OB zone, it requires a special use permit for a restaurant with a liquor license. And so I looked at it in that context. I looked at the criteria for the special use permit specific to the operation of the restaurant. The sets, all the plans that are referred to, I did not include in the report, but they were all included by inference, the plans that had been done. But specifically to the special use permit, I looked directly at the criterion. Will it result in a significant diminution of property values in the surrounding area? I didn't feel there'd be any diminution of value. I looked at the uses of the properties from the corner, from the intersection of East Main Road and Wire Road down to the intersection of Valley Road and East Main Road. Most of the uses are commercial with very similar uses. The hotel and restaurant is right 2 doors down from this particular lot on the same side of the street. There are some residential uses. The residential uses don't appear to be impacted at all by this. They're distant away. There are 3 that are directly across the street from the driveway entrance on the East Main Road, but they are sandwiched by other similar commercial uses that receive a lot of traffic. I didn't see them as being negatively impacted by something across the street. I then looked at Aquidneck Avenue from the intersection with the East Main Road down to the intersection of the East Main Road with Green End Avenue, and those uses are mostly commercial uses as well, very similar uses. There are some residential uses. The residential uses that really stuck out were the ones that are directly on the southern side of this property, and that was the thing that I looked specifically to see what type of buffering they were using. I was satisfied. They have a fairly dense, a fairly dense buffer of evergreen trees that are going to go along the southern border. The residential properties that are there are already impacted by the hotel on one side. There's not much buffering between the hotel and these properties. There are commercial uses directly across the street from the residential uses that are on the road, and they butt right up to the Grange property, but the Grange property doesn't have any buffering. So in fact, this will increase, and I feel the impact is going to be lessened for them the way it is, the way it will be developed. So I didn't see any negative impact to the neighborhood in terms of values when I did the whole neighborhood analysis. Will it create a nuisance in the neighborhood? Now, the proposed uses are similar. I think it's really the same answer as I just gave to the first question. The uses are similar. The hotel is only a couple of doors down. There are no factors that I could see that would create a nuisance in the neighborhood. I would say that I'm not a traffic engineer, but one of the questions that I had was on the traffic. But you have to realize that the Plums are savvy in terms of running successful restaurants. They've done that in an area where it's very densely developed. And I think that they would be very careful. I think we have to assume, one of the things in real estate that we assume is that there's a certain level of proper management that goes into it. And I believe firmly that they would do nothing that would endanger their customers or make it not a popular place for people to use as a destination. So I think that they are going to be very aware of what traffic issues may crop up and be quick to address them to protect both the people that are on site, on cut-through, and traffic outside the restaurant.
So your testimony is that from your experience, taking a left into that property would not pose a problem?
I honestly believe, I hate that intersection personally, so I'm always really careful to look at what goes on in that intersection. But the reality is the traffic backs up beyond this, it constantly backs up at the lake, well beyond, all the way almost to the hotel. So that I doubt very seriously that many people who would have just come through the light are going to stop dead and try to cut through a double lane of northbound traffic. That logic would dictate that they would quickly learn to take the left-hand turn onto Aquidneck Avenue and then take a right-hand turn into the parking lot, which would be much safer. I think that if there are any issues at all, I'm sure that there can be some sort of really increased signage to just warn people not to do not enter type thing from the left-hand lane. I'm not sure how you would do it, but I think that that's a self-leveling type of process, and typically that's what happens in this type of a situation. Good management will work to make sure that the traffic, that people are aware of it and the traffic is not going to be an issue. I think that it is compatible, again, number 3, it's compatible with a comprehensive plan. It only needs a special use permit. These are legal uses, both the office and the restaurant are legal uses in this zone. It only requires that special use permit for the restaurant, so I believe it conforms to the plan. It will not be detrimental or substantially or permanently injure the appropriate use of properties. These are conforming uses. The properties in the area are very similar. There are no factors which would negatively impact or permanently injure appropriate uses. And the granting of the special use permit will not result in hazardous conditions or conditions inimical to public health, safety, or welfare. I don't believe there are any. I believe that it actually does meet the requirements for the special use permit.
Any questions for Mr. Wu? No. Mr. Heaney? Thank you, Mr. Wu.
I don't have any further testimony to present. I don't know if the board's got any further questions of any of the witnesses. The uses, again, that are being proposed here are largely permitted by right. All the office use is permitted by right. The restaurant is actually permitted by right. The only special use permit application is because of the the request to have a restaurant with a liquor license. The, and the type of restaurant that's being proposed here is, as Mr. Plum explained, is sort of like is going to be the upstairs at Brick Alley Plummy's, which is, designed for a situation where it's more of a quick service. You order your food, you take your seat, they bring that food over to you. It's not a really a bar, type of environment. Care has been given to provide the appropriate buffering to the residential uses, and to really reduce any potential nuisance or hazards in the neighborhood. The waiver request with respect to landscaping along this boundary, the property owner to the west has no issues with that waiver. So, all in all, I think this meets the requirements for a special use permit for this type of application. Again, happy to have a review with the board, and after the place has been open 6 months, so we can review any issues. But
I'm not sure how the mechanics of that would work, so I think that's more for our building official.
okay.
Well, the board would need to make it a
Condition.
condition, if you want to make a condition that it be reviewed, that the intersection with East Main be reviewed in 6 months to determine whether any alterations are required to maintain the right turn.
I would almost say a year, because 6 months in Middletown isn't going to give you enough time.
Well,
Mr. Egan.
After the issuance of a CO, something
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
Put that condition based it on when they're up and
Yeah,
running.
I'd be comfortable with a year, because I think I'd rather see us go through all 12 months. Because, I turn left out of Forest Avenue every day of my life. And the fact that anyone's going to turn left going south anytime between May and October, when they have the opportunity to use the light, God love them if they want to do that. So I would be more comfortable going with a year if we put that in. Only because, and we'll do it as a condition from the CO, from the time that it's issued, and then 1 year after that.
Sure.
I'm not sure how we do that.
Would that go
It
through
would just be
the building,
a condition.
They have to come back before us?
or would it go before Jack, Mr. Kane?
If it's a condition of the board, I would say it would come back to the board.
That's what I would think.
For review.
Are you comfortable with that,
Joe?
Ms.?
Do you have any
Yeah,
problems
we're
with that?
comfortable with that condition. Come back before the board with the review of the operations and how things are working, certainly.
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant or the?
I have one question, but it's not really to the applicant, it's really to Mr. Kane and Mr. Reagan in terms of, this is a special use permit to permit a restaurant with a liquor license. And we've had really no discussion at all as to the parameters of this liquor license. I did some research in our code that talks about liquor licenses from A to C, and it appears that A is a package store liquor license, so they're not asking for that. But B or C would be the type of license that would be issued to a restaurant.
My assumption is it would be, and Mr. Martling can confirm
Okay.
the information on that, what type of liquor license, and obviously the issuance of that liquor license would have to be approved by the town council,
Council,
which,
right.
if this is approved tonight, would probably likely be the
Okay,
next step.
and that's what I was interested in, because I didn't know who to ask that question.
Yeah, so it would be a Class B type of license, which is subject to the approval of the town council, as Mr. Regan has indicated. So we haven't been able to apply to the town council because we don't have our zoning squared away.
Right.
So we need to get that squared away and then make application to the town council.
So it's incremental, but that's your intention, is to ask for Class B?
And your testimony tonight is it's primarily a restaurant with a liquor license. It's not a bar. We're not.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and, you've got to go through and notify all the abutters with respect to
Right.
the liquor license application. And go to the board and demonstrate that, you're an appropriate person to be able to have and maintain a liquor license. You know, there is a liquor license on the property to the south at the hotel. There's liquor license there. You know, that, no issues in the neighborhood with respect to that. We would certainly not anticipate any issues.
As far as the restaurant is concerned, how about hours of operations? Because this is mixed use and you do share a boundary with residents.
Yeah, so obviously with respect to anything with a liquor license, the outside boundary of that, you know, is 6 a.m.
Right.
to 1 a.m.
Right.
In Middletown, you don't see a lot of business for restaurants with, you know, liquor license after, you know, 10 o'clock. I mean, so I think it's something that, you know, is going, you know, the Plums will sort of
Feel that one out.
feel that out as times go on, whether, you know,
Can
this
we get
time of the
Mr.
year, is it 9 o'clock, or is it, you know, in the summer, maybe it's closer to, you know, 10 or 11.
Can we get Mr. Plum up here for that?
Certainly, yes.
All your permits and everything, you're up and running. Your hours of operation, would it be like the Brick Alley Pub? How late during the week?
So I just asked Matt, like Brick Alley serves food till 9-ish during the week, and sometimes a little later on the weekend. But if you look at, I think the way that Matt's been taught to run it is also, like, Brick Alley is one of the earlier slowing down places in Newport than a lot of other places, if that makes sense. Part of that's economics, I think, too. Like, we don't want to stay open to just serve someone a beer at midnight, if
Right.
that makes sense. Like, that's not the goal at all. So I don't know if we have a set hours of operation, but I'd imagine.
So you haven't discussed,
We have, I mean, but I guess 10 o'clock maybe would probably be the latest I would suspect we would be open. I doubt we would have stuff much later than that. I mean,
Yeah.
it just going, if you just drive around Middletown, we don't want to keep it open, heat it, staff it, just for like 1 or 2 people.
Yep.
well, I'm not trying to put you on the spot for a specific time,
Sure.
but you're not gonna be, having the restaurant open at 1 o'clock in the morning.
No.
I'm good, laughing.
And that was the genesis of the question, is just to make sure that we know that you are a restaurant, you're not planning on being primarily a bar, and therefore the neighbors don't have to worry that you would keep it open by right to as late as you could.
One thing I'd point out, they have applied for a special use permit for restaurants serving alcohol.
Right.
A
Right.
bar serving alcohol is a separate
Separate.
use that they would have to come back.
Yeah, it's not like
They
a
would have to apply
Woodhookers
for a
or
different special
something
use.
to
permit.
that,
That's why I
or
wanted the
Scotty's or
hours of
something
the
like that.
operation
It's
of the
it's
restaurant.
primarily a restaurant
Good.
that's serving alcohol, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martland.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Okay. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak for or against the petition? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. Can I entertain a motion?
On a motion to approve the special use permit with the attachment that we revisit this application 1 year from the time of the CO was granted?
I would just specify what you're revisiting it for, if it's to review the traffic circulation.
In traffic, yes, specifically to revisit it for the cut-through traffic. For the traffic.
Right.
I would also, Mr. Chairman, recommend that you incorporate the recommendation of the planning board into your motion.
Yes. Also with all the recommendations that were set forth on this particular petition, from the planning board and any and all from DEM.
DOT.
I second the motion.
I have a first and a second discussion.
I'm going to vote to approve the petition. I feel assured by revisiting it and the track record of the Plums that if there is a traffic issue, it will be handled. But by revisiting this a year from the time of the CO gives reassurance that if there is a traffic issue, it'll be handled. So I'm going to vote in favor of the petition.
I'm also planning on supporting it. I think the plans that the Plums have to improve the condition of the current Grange and then build the secondary building there in the same kind of a style is greatly improving the overall property. It's also in accordance with the community comprehensive plan. And I think because of the other things that they talked about in terms of the site development, it's certainly not going to create a nuisance, and it will not be result in diminution of property values for the surrounding residential properties. So I'm going to support that also.
Any other input?
The one thing I would add is I think that it's great that you're preserving the character of a potentially historic site, and the way that you're doing it, I think, is compatible with the community plan. I would just note that I think it would be helpful when we do revisit this in discussion a year from now if you had some sort of data on, ability to monitor how, so it's not just like we have something to review that's measurable to prove, statistics of traffic incidents or anything of that nature would be, I think, valuable.
I too am going to support the motion. I think it's great that we have a restaurant coming to town that's going to not only preserve a historic landmark, but give us something on that side of town, because quite frankly, without companies coming into town, we're stuck with the national chains, which are fine, but sometimes it's nice to go local. So I too am going to support it.
Mr. Chair, just one question to clarify, the 1 year period of time, is it 1 year from now?
CO.
Or CO, okay.
CO.
That's what
It
we
was
just get,
in
we
the-
want to make sure we get it right in the
It
decision.
was in the resolution from CO.
Thank you.
So with that, I'd like to take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Thank you. Meeting's adjourned. 7:25.